Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim announced a new cabinet lineup today, going well beyond filling the 4 vacant ministerial posts. What changed, what didn't, and what does the shake-up signal to us about the direction of the Madani administration? Joining me now on the line to discuss this further is Ibrahim Suffian, Ben, as he is more affectionately known. He's the co-founder and programs director of Merdeka Centre for Opinion Research. Good evening, Ben. Thanks so much for joining me on the show today. I'd love to start our conversation by getting your initial thoughts about the cabinet reshuffle. What are you making of this lineup?
I think this cabinet reshuffle is timely. I mean, considering that we have a number of vacancies that need to be filled up. But when I look at it within the limits of, or rather the constraints that the Prime Minister is faced, being the leader of a coalition comprising many parties, I think he's done remarkably well. Number one, to address some of the critical portfolios and have them headed by what seem to be fairly competent people. At the same time, we also understand that there are representational issues for different communities. He's tried to make good on that, despite the fact that maybe some people may not be happy with choices, particularly even coming from the same party. And finally, there are compromises that need to be made, that he has to maintain some people, otherwise the reshuffle will be too large and create a lot of unnecessary learning curves that need to be traversed before we head towards the end of the political term. Mindful that we just have about 2 years before general elections are to be called. So we think that this is pretty much the last shuffle of the deck before we go towards elections, perhaps in 2027.
All right. So let's take a look at the dropped ministers, Ben. What do these removals signal to you? I mean, do they reflect performance issues of the outgoing ministers, or is it something else altogether?
It's hard to specifically mention performance, partly because a lot of what happens within the ministries are not, completely in the knowledge of the public. Having said that, there are, I think, 2 ministers who were dropped. Minister for Religious Affairs, Dr. Naim, and also Dr. Zaliha Mustafa was dropped as Minister for Federal Territories. I think for the former, it is, I think, an important portfolio relating to Islam and also addressing the issues about the sentiments of the Muslim community. I think the performance, have been an average, but I think the Prime Minister desires more action, particularly mindful that we have 2 more years to the general election, and the battleground for the coming election, is definitely going to be the hearts and minds of the country's Muslim voters. And I think he has promoted the deputy, Dr. Zulkifli, a close ally of the Prime Minister, but also someone who's scholarly and an activist at heart, to try and shake things up and contest the space in the Malay Muslim sphere without, aggravating the other segments of society. With respect to Dr. Zaliha, I think this is a situation where she has not created controversy, and she has, I think, performed remarkably well in terms of addressing the issues within Kuala Lumpur. But perhaps in the context of coalition politics and the need to shuffle the deck, somebody has to go, and it's unfortunate that she had to be the one.
Somebody has to go, you're right. It's a cabinet reshuffle will require some people being dropped, some people being moved. But there were ministries which have been criticized for underperformance quite vocally and publicly, that were left untouched. So talk to me about the non-moves, Ben. How should we read that?
Yeah, I'm just going to be frank here. And I think when we look at social media sentiments and what other political observers, have been postulating over the last couple of years. There are a couple of portfolios, notably the Ministry of Education and to some extent Ministry of Communication, the ministers of which have been criticized in the past. But I think here the Prime Minister has used his prerogatives to maintain the ministers, in part because I think he continues to retain trust in them, that I think he knows how they are performing deep inside, and also the difficulty of managing the portfolios and the issues that they have to address. I think he's more sympathetic to them and they still continue to have his trust. So he's maintained some of those ministers that maybe some segments of the public and the political space have criticized in the past. And I think on this note, I sort of see the perspective that some of the issues that these ministries and the particular ministers have to contend with are not something that's very easily resolved. It's easy to criticize, but once you're in the shoes of these individuals, helming such complex ministries, tackling very difficult issues, sometimes you need to have somebody that may not fulfill the public image of an effective minister, but maybe an honest, hardworking individual that is earnest and true to the job. So there are, I think, considerations that we as members of the public are not aware of. And I think the Prime Minister has made his call on that.
Okay, and you mentioned at the start of our conversation that there are Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim will have many considerations to weigh in reshuffling this lineup. One of them being the fact that he's leading a coalition government. I want to focus in on DAP. Particularly after their poor showing in Sabah, and they had promised that they will accelerate reforms within the next 6 months. How would you characterize DAP's position in the reshuffle? How did they come out from this lineup?
Well, I think DAP, has, like a mixed bag, in terms of the outcome of this particular reshuffle. Number one, I think one of the effective ministers, like Stephen Sim, has been moved to a different portfolio now. So he's in charge of cooperatives. Meanwhile, and he's been moved out from human resources, and now human resources is helmed by a PKR Vice President, Datuk Sri Ramanan. And Hannah Yeoh has been moved from Youth and Sports and now heading FT Ministry. Net, DAP has not gained or lost. But however, in terms of profile and prominence, maybe, it's been taken off a notch a little bit. That said, it also allows them room to focus on addressing the internal issues that they have to face with their own supporters and the public at large. They have to work within the coalition with the Prime Minister to prioritize the areas of reform that they feel is necessary in order to regain the confidence of the public. And I think the context, that this is coming from, the Sabah state elections, is something that's interesting because at one level, people are looking at Sabah and expecting that Sabah election is going to foretell the outcome of the next general election. But if you look closely into what happened in Sabah, it is a microcosm of its own. It has its own political environment and factors that drive voter sentiments there, which are not all completely alike with the rest of the country. So there are some Sabah-specific issues there. But I think DAP is not resting. They're not taking it easy. They will press ahead. And I think the portfolios that they're given continues to provide them with the space to excel and also to show members of the public that they are effective team players. They can enact reforms in the space that they're given and eventually win back the trust of the public.
Right. Okay, so if Sabah's election results was a reflection of the microcosm there, help us understand what the national public sentiment is towards the Madani administration. Ben, you lead a pollster outfit. So talk to me a little bit about what Merdeka Centre's data is reflecting in terms of how the Malaysian public ranks or rates Anwar Ibrahim's administration now, as you say, at the kind of slightly over the mid-cycle point.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a quandary, to be honest with you, because right at the time when the Sabah election campaign was running, we actually ran a national survey. And what we found in the national survey, which ended in the third week of November, was actually the rating of the federal government, the Prime Minister, as well as the broader national level mood is actually quite upbeat. So at the time when we carried out the survey, which ended on the 26th of November, the Prime Minister's approval rating nationally was 57%, which is higher than the last time that we made available publicly, which was 55% sometime in May. So national mood at that point in time was actually upbeat, and it is, I think, coming out from, I think, three important events. I think the first one is what everybody's aware, that Malaysia's successful chairmanship of ASEAN, raised the profile of the country, generated a lot of interest, as well as, promises of investment potential. Number two, we also know that domestically, the economic mood is improving slightly. I wouldn't say broadly speaking, but generally there is an improvement in terms of economic indicators and people's willingness to spend. One simple anecdotal indicator is the thousands of people who were stranded in Hat Yai by the floods. They do have disposable income, except that they were stranded there. And then thirdly is that people do feel that the stability that the country has now enjoyed is translating into socio-economic and political benefits, that they are less focused on politics, but more focused in terms of getting ahead, in terms of their livelihoods. So all of that is quite positive. However, the result of Sabah puts a dampener on the overall mood, particularly amongst people in politics, because they were expecting that the voters in Sabah would celebrate the Madani administration and give scores there. However, what we found in Sabah is that voters in Sabah voted along state-level dynamics. There are issues that voters in Sabah have contended with for decades, and they are unhappy with how things are done there. And they have showed how they view these things in the way they voted. In some parts of Sabah, the traditional way of politics remain very strong, and the warlords and people who have strong grip on the grassroots continue to win. So the country is moving in a way at two tracks. The rest of the country seems to be doing quite okay, but in Sabah, the mood towards the government, as well as some of the political parties, is a bit dim.
Right. Well, Ben, thank you so much for sharing your insights on the show. I appreciate your time. It's always great talking to you. Ibrahim Suffian there from Merdeka Centre. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more about the cabinet reshuffle, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Kini anda boleh stream hiburan tanpa henti dan Netflix hits dengan Astro One.
Mungkin ini permulaan yang terbaik untuk aku fikir dulu.
Kau tak payah nak berlakon dah. Get it together. 빨리 가야 돼.
내가 어떻게 쫓아가요? 나한테 유혹당했거든.
She will be mine.
Today we fight for our future!
This thing, it ties us together forever.
Dapatkan Astro One Entertainment dan Netflix pada harga istimewa di aplikasi My Astro sekarang. Astro mengucapkan tahniah kepada kontingen Malaysia di atas kejayaan mengagumkan di Sukan Sea Thailand 2025. Syabas!
Asia tumpuan utama dunia. Dengan ekonomi yang semakin rancak, pembangunan lestari dan tenaga boleh diperbaharui, apakah pula impak kecerdasan buatan AI dalam perkembangan teknologi dan masa depan pekerjaan? Kami mendalami setiap berita dan cerita. Saksikan diskusi, dialog dan laporan khas di Agenda AWANI Asia bersama koresponden khas kami setiap Sabtu 9 malam di semua platform Astro AWANI.
Malaysia perlu bergerak daripada sekadar menjadi pusat pembuatan kepada sebuah negara pencipta teknologi chip sendiri yang mampu memberi nilai tambah lebih tinggi kepada dunia. Kerajaan bersetuju untuk mempertimbangkan agar pengusaha bot di Sabah dan Sarawak turut layak menerima subsidi petrol RON 95. Sabah kini memiliki 2 tapak rizab biosfera susulan pengiktirafan diberikan kepada Kinabatangan oleh UNESCO.
Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the cabinet reshuffle that was announced earlier today. Joining me now on the line is Aira Azhari, who is the CEO of the think tank Ideas Malaysia. Aira, good evening. Thank you for joining me on the show. So this cabinet reshuffle was initially triggered by the 4 ministerial vacancies, but it looks like Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim went much further than just filling the vacant seats. What do you make of this cabinet reshuffle, Aira? Were there any surprises that stood out to you?
Yeah, hi Mel. So I feel like I have some mixed feelings. So initially there was some speculation that the PM would appoint his daughter, Nurul Izzah, into cabinet. Since she won the deputy presidentship of PKR, it would not have been unprecedented. That didn't happen. There was some expectation as well. I can recall that KJ would be given a role, possibly as a deputy minister through a senatorial appointment. Clearly, there's some excitement about what his future in politics is, but that also didn't happen. So there are a few standouts, I would say. I think YB Taufik Johari in the Youth and Sports Ministry. Also, I think quite unprecedented. He is a vice president of AMK, the youth wing of PKR, considering that both the president and deputy president of AMK do not have even deputy minister positions. I think that's quite interesting and unprecedented. I'm also very intrigued by the Deputy Minister for Religious Affairs, Marhama Rosli, who is a Justice for Zara activist. She's one of the pioneers of the movement in Sabah and is a highly respected activist and religious preacher in Sabah, which I don't know if we've had a deputy religious minister from Sabah before. I would say Akmal Nasrullah in Rafizi Ramli's old portfolio. The economy ministry is also interesting. He's a well-known ally of Rafizi and his protege as well. Some people are interpreting it as maybe the prime minister wanting to, sort of extend an olive branch, I suppose. But also interesting to see a young person in that portfolio. And I guess the other standout is YB Adam Adli's move to Deputy Minister of Higher Education from Youth and Sports. Of course, he is a very well-known student activist back when in his student days. And I'm not surprised if there will be a lot of demands and a lot of scrutiny on that position since he's now in that position to make some kind of difference in the higher education sector. So those are some of the things that stood out to me. Yeah.
Well, they resonate completely with me as well, Aira. But if you were to look at, broadly speaking, who gains, who loses, if I may use that word, relatively speaking, in terms of this cabinet lineup, are there parties that benefited more and parties that had to trade off more?
It's hard to say. I'm not going to pretend that I remember each and every portfolio swap at the moment, but it seems like from the first glance that most of the positions are swaps. So I don't see like such a big gain or loss for any particular party. But if you want to look at in terms of representation, I guess it's good that we have younger people in cabinet, like the examples of Akmal Nasir and Taufik Johari come to mind. I guess for future politics and politics of young people and the need to have a younger generation of leaders in Malaysia, this is positive. But of course, I also realize that cabinet appointments, ministerial appointments, are, the PM also needs to balance a lot of other factors, such as party representation, I think, is one of the main factors that he needs to balance. So having more young people or having more representation of certain groups could just be a consequence of that and might not actually be the intention. So I think that's the complicated thing about cabinet appointments in Malaysia. Yeah.
But when you look at the ministries that were affected, Aira, do you see coherent policy logic? I'm just wondering, the ministries that are perceived to be performing versus those that are perceived to be underperforming. I'm wondering whether the non-moves, the absence of movement in the cabinet lineup for certain ministries, if that's just as telling as the changes themselves.
Yeah, well, it's not so straightforward, right? So there are some examples of positions such as when Stephen Sim was minister at Kesuma. I think he was perceived as doing a good job overall. The gig workers bill was passed, something that has been pushed for and has been needed in Malaysia for a long time. And he has been moved to Kuskop, which some say is a more junior portfolio. Also, these things are not set in stone. It is usually convention or perception rather. And you have ministers that have come under criticism over the last few years, such as education, home ministry, who have been involved in national level debates about education, about citizenship issues, for example, who have remained in those portfolios. And there could be many reasons for this, right? Again, we must remember that ministerial appointments are a political exercise, and the PM needs to balance between party interests and within parties as well. Appointments are made based on seniority of positions. So, and ministries like education and home ministry are also very senior portfolios, seem to be given to MPs who are are seen to have a bright future. Ministry of Education, for example, were portfolios held by former prime ministers in the past. So, so many considerations, and unfortunately, these things are not as straightforward. Just because an individual, a minister, is not popular in the eyes of the public, it doesn't mean that his or her position is automatically in trouble when it comes to a cabinet reshuffle, because these appointments are the Prime Minister's discretion.
Right, definitely. Yeah. There's more nuance to that. So when you look at this lineup, we are, we were in the last leg of the election cycle. Essentially, we have 2 years till the end of this 5-year term. When you look at this lineup, Aira, do you think does it inspire confidence in the public? Do you think there is an opportunity here to rebuild any loss of confidence that the Madani administration may have had with some of its voting public?
Unfortunately, I don't think so, because as we discussed, the critical ministries that are public facing, such as education, home, domestic trade, those ministries are left untouched, and seems like, for whatever reason, the Prime Minister does not want to sort of shake up that status quo. Probably not a great idea when state elections are coming next year, and then the general election the following year. So we must remember that, portfolios such as international trade, foreign affairs are very important for Malaysia, but it's usually the domestic facing ministries that are the ones that will face scrutiny by Malaysians and by voters. So I don't think that this represents a big shakeup in the status quo, and trust in government and in politicians is also built through the Prime Minister himself. So I think there has been a lot of talk in recent months about the seriousness of this government, of the Prime Minister in fulfilling reforms, and that still remains to be seen. So next year, there's a lot of speculation on whether all the important bills, political financing and all that is going to be tabled in Parliament. So I think with those promises of reforms being fulfilled, if those are fulfilled, then I think public trust can be regained.
Okay,
Yeah.
so having said all that, Aira, what specific ministries or portfolios are you watching, or should we also be watching more closely for after this shake-up?
Well, I think the Ministry of Economy, even though many people say that it's a ministry that's not very powerful, I would say that having Akmal Nasir there is an interesting development, and I hope if he does well, if he proves himself in the next year, then I think it's a good sign for new leadership. Maybe in the future. NRES, which is now under Arthur Joseph Kurup, would also be an interesting ministry to observe, because natural resources and environment, climate is obviously such an important issue that Malaysia needs to tackle head on. And the previous minister, Nik Nazmi, also I think got a lot of praise from the public and from civil society. So it'll be interesting to see how the new minister moves that portfolio. Kesuma, Stephen Sim, previous minister who's now been moved to Kuskop, having Ramadan there is also an interesting development. He of course won the vice presidency in PKR. In the recent party elections, and also he's a former MIC politician, and Human Resource Ministry has traditionally been an MIC portfolio during Barisan Nasional's time. So I think this is also an interesting one to observe. Of course, agencies under Kesuma has been under scrutiny as well before. And of course, youth and sports under Taufik Johari, such an important portfolio as well. And we'll see how all of that goes. Yeah.
Aira, thank you so much for being on the show with me. I appreciate your time. Aira Azhari there, the CEO of the think tank Ideas Malaysia, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.